Sarah Matthews served as deputy press secretary in the Trump administration. Tim Miller is a former Republican strategist and is now host of the Bulwark podcast, and both join me now. So I'm going to start with you because we have talked about Haley and Haley voters and Haley's future before. I just gave my rundown of what I think is going on here, but what am I missing, and what's your take on what her calculation is?
Yeah, that last clip was hard to listen to. It all was, but her talking about how she's going to tell the hard truths, and then contrasting it with being like, I'm going to vote for Trump because he stands with our allies. It doesn't make any sense. It is. And I don't think she is trying to make it make sense, right? Like, what is happening here is pretty obvious. Nikki Haley wants to have a future in the Republican Party. She thinks a punishment worse than death is what Liz Cheney is going through, where she's not welcome at Republican fundraisers and Republican events and, at Republican hobnobbing at Sullivan's Island in South Carolina. And she wants to potentially run for office again, whether it's 28 or 32 or 36 or whatever, assuming we have elections then. And so Nikki Haley knows if she endorses Joe Biden this time, then she will be persona non grata. And she figures if she votes for Trump and gives some, mealy-mouthed, half justified BS rationale for it, then her options will be open. And that's all this is. It's about keeping her options open in Republican politics. It's nothing more, nothing less.
It's a sad state. The allies thing really struck me, too. And watching it again, I was like, that does not make any sense, that particular point. Sarah, you were a Haley supporter. You talked about how you supported a number of things she said. You also tweeted when she came out with her endorsement, quote, the outcome was both predictable and inevitable. It's sad to say that, but I agree with you. This is more of your tweet. I accepted long ago that 99% of politicians will choose personal ambition over principles every single time. What is shocking, however, is that Nikki Haley gains nothing from this, but loses everything, the support she built during the primary and her dignity. And I thought this was so interesting because you are a Haley supporter. There is a percentage of people in the party who supported Haley. I agree with Tim that this is her calculation about running for future office and trying to secure the MAGA base. But what do you think, among other fellow Haley supporters in the Republican base, what do you think the response is going to be? Not surprised? Is it going to turn them off? What's their response?
Yeah, what's so interesting is that she clearly felt a need to endorse Donald Trump and say she's going to vote for him because she's holding out hope for 2028 that she can run again. And she thinks that she needs to win over the MAGA base. And the thing is, I don't think the MAGA base will ever accept her.
Yeah.
I mean, she has criticized Donald Trump time and time again. It goes all the way back to 2016, and she's flip-flopped numerous times on it. And so I think they have already rejected her. And then what is shocking, though, is that she did build this support in the 2024 primary among people like myself who are Republicans, who are looking for an alternative, who maybe necessarily aren't happy with Joe Biden, but are turned off by Donald Trump and his lack of moral clarity and his actions on January 6th and things like that. And she was building momentum, and she really could have then maybe in a post-Trump Republican Party been the leader. But instead, she chooses to bend the knee, kiss the ring, like every other Republican seems to do. I mean, Donald Trump said it best. They always bend the knee. And it's just disappointing, but again, not surprising.
Yeah, unfortunately. Tim, one of the questions people ask me a lot is, could she be on the ticket? And I think there's no way that happens because I can't imagine Trump picks her, but she does have kind of a base of support among Republicans, clearly. What's your take on that? What do you tell people when they ask you?
Yeah, just really quick on her base of support. I don't know that it's quite as big as it seems. I think that Nikki Haley has a small group of supporters that really love Nikki Haley and her kind of politics. I think another part of the people that were voting for her were just people that didn't want Donald Trump to be the Republican Party nominee, and she was the vessel for that. She was the last vessel standing. So it might not be as big as it looks like in her vote totals. As for the VP, look, Donald Trump, the one thing that he has never done is betray his MAGA base on something that is a core issue that matters to them. And when I was at a rally in Arizona, this MAGA Coachella that I suffered through, and Steve Bannon was on stage and suggested that the establishment's going to try to make Nikki Haley VP. The venom in that crowd, the people around me, the screaming, the cursing, it got a greater reaction than anything. I mean, among the MAGA base, Nikki Haley is a traitor. She's almost worse than a Democrat. They'd rather have Tulsi or a former Democrat that switched sides. So I just can't imagine Donald Trump picking somebody that would be that anathema to his core supporters.
Yeah, I agree. It seems hard to wrap your head around. She also has challenged him in the past, so I don't know how much he would like that. Sarah, let me ask you, I mean, because some of our reporters have done kind of some interviews with people, man-on-street interviews, where they talk to people about Haley supporters, about what this means for them, her support. Let me play a quick bite of that, and then I want to get your take on the other side.
Would you be disappointed if she endorsed Trump?
I don't really think she will. I think she'll just keep.
If she does, I'll vote Democrat. That's all there is to it.
Now, this is just one example, right? But it's an interesting question here, whether these Haley supporters look at her and they say, oh, she's supporting Trump, now I'm going to support Trump, or whether they say, I never liked Trump, that's why I like Haley, to Tim's point. And it's probably not monolithic, but what's your take on what we should expect?
Yeah, I agree with what Tim said. I think a lot of her supporters were looking for a vessel, and she just happened to be that person at the end. And I think that people were really excited to see her challenge Donald Trump, especially the way she ramped up her attacks against him in those few final months of her campaign. And so I think people were excited about that. But I think at the end of the day, I don't know if I see a majority of those supporters following her toward Trump. I think there will be a handful, though, of them who are still on the fence. And by her going and saying she's going to vote for Donald Trump, it creates this permission structure for those kinds of normie Republicans then to follow her. And in an election that's going to be decided on the margins, even if it's not the majority of those supporters, just having those few who might then end up following her and supporting Donald Trump could make the difference in some of those key battleground states. But what I will say is that I never in any universe expected her to come out and endorse Joe Biden. Right. That was never going to happen. But I think that she could have taken a page out of Mike Pence's book and just declined to endorse Trump.
And just held back, clearly. I mean, it's the ambitions piece, I think, got the best of her in that case. Okay, so Tim, let me ask you, as we all know, I mean, a lot of this type of outreach from the Biden team, some of it may happen overtly, some of it may be conversations behind the scenes. What do you think the campaign should be doing to kind of reach some of these voters that might not be quite with Biden yet, but are not following her lead to go with Trump?
Yeah, I think two things. One, got to recruit other surrogates, like people that Sarah worked with from the Trump administration. Mark Esper's going out there. Yeah. I just think that the people who've been around Trump to go out there, if there's some of them, even a few that'll say they'll endorse Biden, put them on TV, show them at the convention, show that there are other people that like these voters out there. As far as a message, if you look at that Haley rubric, those Haley voters that are strong on national security, fiscally conservative, and think Donald Trump has bad character, Joe Biden can message to them. He can say, look, I'm for NATO, Trump's for Putin. Our economy's improving. Trump wants a 10% tariff on everything. I will be a person that respects our Constitution. Trump won't. That's a compelling message for some of those voters. It's not going to get every single one of them over the line, but I think that's a message that could resonate.
Yeah, it's interesting how much overlap, not on everything, but there is between Haley and Biden on some of these national security issues that I know are important to some of her voters. Tim Miller, Sarah Matthews, thank you so much for being with me on Memorial Day weekend. I appreciate you both. Joining me now is our in-house law firm and two people who know a thing or two about crafting closing arguments. Andrew Weissman is former general counsel at the FBI, and Neil Katyal is the former acting U.S. Solicitor General. Okay, Andrew, I'm going to start with you. What advice would you give to the prosecution heading into closing arguments? What do they need to do?
I'll tell you what they need to do. There's no way I would give advice to Josh Steinglass. He's tried more cases than I have, than Neil and us combined. I mean, he's a real pro. This is what I expect. I think first you're going to see a timeline with really letting the jury see from beginning to end how all the evidence fits together. And you're going to see that in a sort of PowerPoint form where they lay out all of the sort of so-called hard evidence, the emails, the phone records. Then they'll layer in the sort of softer evidence, which is from witnesses, and show how that all fits together. Second, they will address Michael Cohen. I think you'll see them talk about all of the proof that was in place prior to his testifying to show just how strong this case is. And then finally, I think they need to really argue the case about why it would be so ridiculous to think that Alan Weisselberg and Michael Cohen, who clearly knew the scheme and orchestrated it, would have kept this from Donald Trump. And there are just a ton of reasons why it was in their interest to let him know what happened. It would be totally against their interest not to do so. And there's lots of corroborating evidence, including Hope Hicks, who says it would be completely out of character for Michael Cohen to have kept this from him. Indeed, I think all of the attacks on Michael Cohen by the defense will be flipped to say that is exactly why he wouldn't have done something like this out of generosity. He would have actually had 130,000 reasons to tell Donald Trump because he wanted to get repaid.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know you've made that point before, which has stuck with me. Now, Neil, I want to ask you first if you have anything to add to what Andrew said, and also what we should expect from the defense, given what we've seen over the last couple of weeks in their closing argument.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say, Jen, is it's just significant that we're finally at closing arguments after Trump's repeated attempts to delay this, to stop this trial, even just a couple days ago, rushing to the Court of Appeals, saying the judge has to be recused for bias and stuff. All of that has been beaten back by the Appellate Court in New York. And so now we are finally going to get to closing arguments. And I think what the Trump defense is going to do is basically to say, this is not a case about Donald Trump, it's a case about Michael Cohen. And they'll put Michael Cohen on trial. They'll call him a liar. They'll say he was convicted because he was a liar, that he's in it for his own ends, that he's in it for ego because he's not a spurned lover, but a spurned lawyer by Donald Trump and the like. And what the prosecution is going to say, picking up on what Andrew said just a moment ago, and I totally agree with it, is that this is not just a case about Michael Cohen. It's a case about Michael Cohen plus. Cohen is just gravy. And it's things like the Hope Hicks testimony that Andrew referred to, but it's also handwritten notes that we've got and those checks that you just flashed on the screen a moment ago, which picks up on paragraph 33 in the complaint. These are checks that Donald Trump himself signed. And so that shows knowledge of the whole scheme. And I think at the end of the day, that Trump defense is going to play trying to get to beyond a reasonable doubt, just getting one juror who's going to say, hey, I disagree, because in our system that means you can't put him in jail. And the prosecution is going to say, hey, this is common sense. We're talking about a guy, Donald Trump, who watched every penny. Do you really think that he would have been cool with all this money going out of his account without knowing it? Do you really think he would just reimburse $430,000 or whatever that number is without some knowledge about what was going on? Of course not. So it's a common sense case, and I suspect that it's going to be successful.
Andrew, let me ask you, I mean, jury instructions is something that most of us have not heard about or didn't know a lot about before the last couple of weeks. It's quite important in this case. What are you looking for as we learn more about what the jury instructions are later this week?
Well, jury instructions are important, Jen, but I actually think they're kind of not the story here. Alvin Bragg would not have brought a case if he was seeking a jury instruction that was not down the middle. And I think here, I actually think most people should just not worry about what the actual charge is, because it's going to be the straightforward, what's called sort of standard jury charges. They're sort of uniform charges that the judge is going to give. Yes, there's some argument around the edges, and there's some important charges, but none of it is controversial. This is what the judge is going to give is just straight law. There are some pieces that are useful, but I actually think this is one where, of the things to worry about, it is really like, will the jury, in many ways, is there a holdout juror who sort of made up their mind sort of before they came in? Are jurors going to feel, because it's a former president, that they're going to hold the state to an even higher standard than proof beyond a reasonable doubt, even if it's just unconsciously, that they sort of feel like there should be more, because you do have to rely, I think in this case, both on direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. So I think those are the things that I'm sort of focused on, and sort of how the arguments go on the facts. But the law is pretty straightforward here. So that's a long way of sort of fighting the hypothetical on something not to really worry about.
Thank you for easing our burden on that, of the things we need to become experts on. Andrew Weissmann, Neil Katyal, I will see you a lot this week. We will all see you a lot this week, I'm certain. Thank you both so much for joining me. LaDoris Cordell is a former Superior Court judge from the state of California, and she joins me now. Judge Cordell, thank you so much for spending some time with me on a Memorial Day weekend. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So let me just start with the jury instructions. I mean, they might not be the most exciting part of a trial out there. You might have heard Andrew Weissman's take in the previous segment, but it's important for people to understand. So how do they help the jury apply the law to the evidence they've heard at a trial? Most of people on the jury are not lawyers or from the judicial system, of course.
Yeah, well, Jen, my take on jury instructions is a bit different from that of Andrew Weissman. Guilty verdicts are reversed most frequently because of faulty jury instructions. And who is it that gives the jury instructions? It's the judge. It's all the judge's fault if a conviction gets reversed because of the jury instructions. So the jury has two jobs: find the facts and also then apply the law. And in the jury instructions, there's some talk about circumstantial evidence, direct evidence, what to do when you go into the jury deliberation room, how you should keep an open mind. But the key elements on these jury instructions are the crimes that are charged here against Donald Trump. Now, you recall that the judge, when going over the instructions with the lawyers, there were 12 different instructions or issues that came up that the judge had to decide. And of the 12, the judge still didn't make decisions on at least 5 of them. And then when all that was done, the prosecution raised another 6 issues with jury instructions, and the defense raised 6, prosecution raised 3, and the judge deferred decisions on all those until later. So these are really, really important in the weeds kinds of stuff that are going to go to the jurors. So think about this. You have 12 jurors, and they're all lay people. And I include the 2 lawyers because they do civil cases. They don't do criminal cases. So in this instance, these are people who this whole criminal system, reasonable doubt, is all new to them. So they're going to get these instructions that deal with the elements of the offenses that these lawyers and the judge couldn't even agree upon, and the judge is still waiting to decide. And then finally, this is just what boggles my mind. So the judge is going to read these instructions eventually, and there'll be pages of them. And I have done this when I have presided over criminal cases. So in New York, apparently, the written copies of the jury instructions do not go into the jury room. So the jurors are sitting there taking all this information in and having to remember. They don't have the ability to do that, particularly when this in the weeds kinds of stuff. So it is my hope that, of course, a copy of the jury instructions will go into the jury deliberation room. I always did that when I presided over jury trials. And if the law in New York doesn't require it, I hope that there will be legislators in New York or people in the judiciary who will make it a rule. How can you possibly consider all this without actually seeing the jury instructions in writing?
I saw that, and it also struck me as a non-lawyer, how will they know what to do and how will they remember how to implement all of this? So let me ask you, I mean, the jury must believe, in order to convict Trump, they must believe that Trump falsified business records with, quote, an intent to commit another crime, which is very specific. According to the judge, the jury does not need to be unanimous about what the other crime was. This is what are you going to be looking for in terms of how that is spelled out in the jury instructions to properly instruct them on how they should consider this?
Right. So that was one of the issues that came up when the jury instructions were being discussed. But you left out a word. It said Donald Trump caused the documents to be falsified. So the issue that was discussed is, what does cause mean? How does someone cause something to happen? Does somebody tell somebody to do it, or can you cause it in a different way? That's another issue that the judge is considering, which will be a part of the instructions. So the jurors have to understand what cause means, and then the intent to defraud, and then the commission of crimes. So the defense wanted the jury to be unanimous on what these crimes were. And so the prosecution says, no, 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 no. The jury doesn't have to be unanimous. They can think that there were different crimes. It could be election fraud. It could be tax evasion. They don't have to be unanimous. They just have to believe that there was some sort of crime that was going to be committed, or that Donald Trump aided or assisted in committing. All of this is going to be contained in the jury instructions. They have to have this stuff in writing so they know exactly what to do. And going forward, sitting there trying to figure out if the elements of the crimes have been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. I just can't emphasize enough, these jury instructions are critical to what's going to happen in this case.
Judge Doris Kodell, thank you so much for educating us, informing us. Very few people know as much as you do about how this works. So really appreciate it as well. We're all preparing to watch next week. Thanks for joining me.